Welcome back, fight fans. Um, we officially hit day 10 of the WMMA6 Developers Journal. That means we are halfway there in the massive breakdown of everything Adam Ryland has been cooking up behind the scenes for Grey Dog Software. I'll be honest with you all. I, I haven't been feeling the greatest lately. I've got a stuffy nose and my head hurts, and it hasn't been a great day. So I might sound a little more. You probably can tell that I don't sound the greatest either, but we're still pushing through because the day 10 updates deserve their spotlight, and you've all been showing incredible support. And knowing that we're halfway through the journey, the game keeps getting deeper, smarter, and more polished. So today's entries continue that trend. Let's settle in, take it at a steady pace, and break down everything that's been revealed for day 10 of the Developers Journal. And we'll start things off with number 46, the upgraded fight engine. The fights have been upgraded with more positions, such as a whole new section for wild toe-to-toe brawls where the fighters go all out at each other. An increase in the amount of potential commentary lines and more overall incidents. Additionally, many of the underlying mechanics have been tweaked to address feedback from the suggestions forum and achieve a more realistic output. The rest of this journal entry will go into detail into some of the more prominent of these changes. So the fight engine has a major upgrade, making fights feel more alive, more dramatic, and more true to real MMA for that as well. And now we've got number 47, striking versus wrestling. By request, the game engine has been rebalanced so that the striker versus wrestler battles are more fair and more realistic, stats dependent, of course. This is something that players have been asking for a long time. In short, styles matter, but stats matter more, just like real mixed martial arts. Wrestlers often had an easier time forcing their game plan, even when the striker had strong takedown defense or better overall stats. And strikers sometimes outperformed in situations where they realistically shouldn't. WMMA6 fixes this by tightening the underlying mechanics so the matchup feels balanced, believable, and the WMMA6, in short, making striker versus wrestler fights more realistic and rebalancing the engine so that outcomes depend on actual stats and abilities, not just the stereotypes. A noticeable improvement over WMMA5's more rigid style interactions. And now this is a big one for number 48, realistic strikes. The frequency and success rate for strikes, particularly low-level punches and kicks, have been overhauled to try and provide a more realistic model. The frequencies used are based on real-life data from UFC fights over the past few years to try and get maximum realism. But the fight engine modifiers can, of course, be used to further tweak this if the database maker wishes. Additionally, the post-fight metrics have been significantly upgraded to show how many of each category of strikes were attempted, rather than only showing how many actually connected. as it has been in previous games. This gives a much better sense of how the fights actually unfolded. In particular, it is worth noting that the striking model now takes weight far more into consideration. Smaller fighters will tend to throw a lot more strikes per round than the larger counterparts. Plus, the impact of punches scales with weight, so that you'll generally see many more knockdowns and KOs with larger fighters, and less for smaller fighters. This is all reflected in the metrics and commentary. This is one of the biggest fight engine realism upgrades so far. WMMA6 completely overhauls how often fighters can throw jabs, crosses, low kicks, body shots, and basic combinations. These new frequencies are based on UFC fight data from recent years, meaning that the game now mirrors how often fighters actually throw these incidents and strikes in real life. In WMMA5, strike frequency could feel too low or too uniform or not weight appropriate or not really reflective of modern pacing. WMMA6 looks to fix that. The new striking model heavily factors in fighter size as well. Smaller fighters will throw more strikes per round, with larger fighters throwing fewer strikes, but with much more impact. Knockouts and knockdowns scale with weight, and the commentary and metrics will reveal these differences. This makes the flyweight fights feel more fast and busy, while the heavyweights fights could feel slower but more dangerous. Exactly like real mixed martial arts. And now we can see the attempts and connections for each strike type. WMMA 5 only showed how many landed, which made it hard to understand pressure, activity, accuracy, pacing, and dominance. Now you can see exactly how a fight unfolded round by round as well. Because the strike model has been upgraded, commentary now reflects this, with higher activity, more realistic exchanges, weight-based pacing, more knockdowns for big fighters, and more overall strikes for small fighters, and more meaningful momentum swings. This makes the fight engine feel more alive and more authentic. Now going into number 49 is spectacular strikes. We have 3 new attack types: Superman punches, spinning back fists, and flying knee strikes have been added as regular options so that fighters can deploy them as part of the striking engine. Previously, these could only happen as fairly rare special incidents and were mostly out of the control of the database maker. These additions add realism to the game engine and can make fights feel more exciting. Additionally, as they are now a regular part of the striking engine, this means that there are new attributes that have been added to help boost certain fighters from using them more often. Database makers will be able to manipulate these to get more output. So why does this matter? In WMMA 5, these moves only appeared as rare special incidents. They were uncommon, unpredictable, not directly influenced by fighter attributes, and was mostly outside the control of database makers. Now they are part of normal striking behavior. These strikes can be thrown during regular exchanges. They can be thrown as part of combinations in brawl sequences and whenever appropriate based on fighter style and stats. This makes the fights feel more exciting or more varied and more realistic and more like modern MMA. In short, spectacular strikes are no longer rare luck. They are part of a fighter's identity. And now going into number 50, we've got Era Fight Engine modifiers. The Fight Engine modifier section, which used to be a separate part of the game, has now been moved into the Era section. This move means that Fight Engine modifiers are far easier to share via importing and exporting, and also database makers have far more power to have fights notably change as the game world evolves. For example, you might alter the weighing system so that good quality boxing becomes more prevalent as mixed martial arts evolves, or make exotic submissions become more common over time. This change is all about making the fight engine evolve over time, just like how real MMA would work. This is now moved into the era system, which means modifiers can be tied to specific eras. They can change automatically as time passes and can be imported and exported easily, which database makers can shape. Excuse me. Excuse me. Database makers can now shape how MMA evolves in their universe. Why this is a big deal. In WMMA5, fight engine modifiers were separate, they were static, more difficult to share, and not tied to world evolution. This now tries to fix that by letting eras control how the sport changes. Here are just a few examples of what the database makers can do. Making boxing skills more important in later eras. Making exotic submissions more common in early eras. Increase striking volume as MMA modernizes. Reduce stalling or lay and pray over time. Making flashy techniques more common in certain eras. Adjust knockout frequency as training evolves. Or change grappling dominance depending on the era. This gives the creators the ability to simulate historical evolution, fictional trends, rule changes, stylistic eras, and realism in long-term saves. In short, the fight engine can now evolve with the world automatically. And now going into number 51, we have disqualifications. By request, disqualifications are now more frequent, with eye gouges and low blows being more prominent parts of the game. Additionally, attributes have been added to help simulate whether certain fighters are more likely to use them. Additionally, cage grabs have been overhauled so that fighters are smarter about using them and referees are more realistic in the way that they respond to that. Why does this matter though? In WMMA 5, fouls were rare and they were predictable and not necessarily tied to fighter personality, which sometimes made it unrealistic. Which WMMA6 fouls makes it more realistic and more like the real world of mixed martial arts. It's messy, unpredictable, and influenced by fighter tendencies. And now we've got dangerous ground strikes for number 52. By request, dangerous ground strikes like stomps, soccer kicks, and knees to the head of a grounded opponent have been increased in frequency, rules dependent. This helps simulate some real world companies a little better. Dangerous ground strikes like stomps, soccer kicks, and knees to the head of a grounded opponent appear more often when allowed to do so. Why does this matter? There are some real world promotions like Pride historically, or certain modern Asian organizations like One Championship and Ryzen that allow these kind of strikes. WMMA5 barely used them even while they were legal. WMMA6 increases the frequency so that fights in these promotions feel more authentic, they feel more violent, and more stylistically accurate. This is a big realism boost for rule sets outside the UFC style standard. And now going into number 53 is cut checking. By request, cuts are checked less often during fights in general, and referees are also smarter about when they do so. There's less chance of it happening when one fighter has a dominant position or is close to finishing the fight. So there's fewer unnecessary interruptions, less checking during dominant positions, less checking when a fighter is close to finishing, and more realistic timing overall. Why does this matter? WMMA5 sometimes paused fights at awkward or unrealistic moments. WMMA6 makes cut checks feel more real, more like real MMA, only happening when they are to make sense. And now we've got for number 54, takedown variants. There is now more variety to the takedown styles that a fighter can employ, including more trips and drag downs. This ties into the fighter's background and so adds to the realism of the game engine and commentary. So a judo fighter wouldn't shoot double legs all day, and a wrestler won't suddenly use judo trips unless their stats support it. Why does this matter? WMMA5 had fewer takedown types, making grappling feel repetitive. WMMA6 now looks to add depth, realism, and better commentary tied to these fighters' backgrounds. So there's more takedown styles tied to fighter backgrounds, making grappling exchanges feel more authentic. Now going into number 55, we have takedown counters. Fighters now have a new option to counter shots by stuffing the takedown and responding with a flurry of punches or knee strikes. This was by request to help give strikers more of a chance to defend aggressively against opponents who were constantly trying to take them down, where in previous games they could become passive due to a lack of counter options. This gives a realistic sprawl and brawl moment, something that happens all the time in real MMA. Why does this matter? Strikers often became too passive when defending takedowns because they didn't have many counter options, and wrestlers could repeatedly shoot without having much danger in doing so. WMMA6 looks to fix that by letting strikers punish sloppy takedown attempts, making these matchups feel more dynamic and authentic. And now heading into number 56, kinetic fights. Smaller fighters now take less time to perform actions during fights, whereas heavier fighters take longer. The end result is that fights between smaller competitors will feel more kinetic and faster paced because you're getting more things happening in a shorter span of time, whereas larger athletes will feel slower and more plodding by comparison. Of course, this is all stat dependent as well. This adds up to a more realistic simulation. Action speed now scales with weight. Smaller fighters can have more exchanges, quicker scrambles, higher pace, and more kinetic feel, whereas larger fighters perform slower, with heavier movement, more plodding pace, fewer exchanges, and more deliberate action. Why does this matter? In World of Mixed Martial Arts 5, all fights had roughly the same pacing regardless of weight class. WMMA6 makes the flyweight fights feel fast and busy, with heavyweight fights feeling slower but more dangerous. Just like real MMA. The pacing is all stats dependent still, so elite heavyweights can move faster, but small fighters can still be sluggish. But overall, the engine now reflects realistic weight-based tempo. Going into number 57 now is shoulder strikes. There has been a new section that has been added to the fight engine where competitors can throw unorthodox shoulder strikes to the face from the clinch position to try and break the opponent's nose or to just stun them. There is also a new attribute to help make some fighters more likely to use this tactic. Previously, this tactic didn't exist at all in the fight engine. This is a real tactic that was used in MMA. Think Conor McGregor versus Cerrone, but WMMA 5 did not include this at all. So this makes clinch battles feel more varied and authentic. Going now into number 58, there is rush starts. To make the fight engine more realistic, some fighters will occasionally start the fight by aggressively rushing in and throwing bombs to try and overwhelm their opponent. This looks to mirror what sometimes happens in real MMA, where certain fighters explode out of the gate. And now we have got stamina reworking for number 59. The way stamina affects fighters has been totally redone in order to give a more realistic simulation and prevent longer fights descending in clinch fests because the fighters were too gassed to do anything else. In WMMA 5, once fighters ended up getting tired, fights often became repetitive and dull. This new stamina overhaul for WMMA 6 keeps fights engaging from start to finish. And now we've got new strike metrics as well. To make things more realistic, the old style of metrics where strikes were divided into jabs and power have been replaced with the new terms of insignificant and significant, and which strikes fall into which category has been modified. This doesn't affect how fights actually unfold, but it makes the metrics easier to understand and much more realistic. This aligns with how UFC and other major promotions track stats. And why does this matter? It's easier to understand, it's more realistic, and it better reflects what fans and analysts can look for. It doesn't necessarily change fight behavior, only how the stats are displayed. So that wraps up day 10 of the Developer's Journal. We are officially past the halfway mark, and today's updates push the fight engine even deeper into realism. From shoulder strikes to rush starts to smarter stamina, better metrics, and more dynamic incidents. I'm still not feeling the best, but I appreciate you sticking with me through these breakdowns. We'll keep moving forward. The next entry will be on Monday. Thank God, because I can have some time to rest, and hopefully I'll sound better, and hopefully I'll feel better when Monday's entry rolls around. So stick around, hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more content involving breakdowns or any series I'm doing for other games, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications. I'm All Star Productions, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay sharp, stay focused, and stay the All Stars that you are. Bye, guys.